The unthinkable just happened. In one catastrophic night, the United States Navy suffered its most devastating loss since World War II. An entire carrier strike group crippled, potentially sunk by a swarm attack so overwhelming that America's most advanced defense system simply collapsed under the sheer volume of incoming threats. The USS Theodore Roosevelt, a 97,000-ton supercarrier valued at $13 billion, now sits dead in the water approximately 40 nautical miles from the Strait of Hormuz, its escort vessels scattered and burning, its air wing decimated, and its crew facing a nightmare scenario that Pentagon war games predicted but no one truly believed could happen. Iran just proved that the era of American naval dominance in the Persian Gulf is over. And what you're about to discover will shatter everything you thought you knew about modern naval warfare and the true balance of power in the Middle East. This wasn't a lucky shot. This wasn't a single missile breaking through defenses. This was a meticulously planned, brilliantly executed demonstration of asymmetric warfare doctrine that turned America's most expensive military assets into floating coffins. At approximately 0200 hours local time, Iranian forces unleashed Operation Martyr Soleimani, a coordinated swarm attack involving over 400 unmanned aerial vehicles, 300 anti-ship cruise missiles, and 70 ballistic missiles, all converging simultaneously on the Roosevelt strike group from multiple vectors spanning land, sea, and air launch platforms. The attack came in waves specifically designed to saturate and overwhelm the Aegis combat system, exploiting the exact vulnerabilities that defense analysts have warned about for years but were consistently ignored by Pentagon leadership convinced of American technological superiority. The numbers are staggering and the implications are earth-shattering. Within the first 18 minutes of the attack, the strike group's defensive umbrella completely disintegrated. The guided missile cruiser USS Lake Champlain fired every single one of its 122 SM-2 and SM-6 interceptor missiles, valued at approximately $4 million each, achieving a reported 68% intercept rate before its vertical launch systems went dry. The two Arleigh Burke-class destroyers USS Mustin and USS Ralph Johnson exhausted their combined missile magazines within 22 minutes, frantically engaging targets until they had nothing left to fire. And here's what the mainstream media absolutely will not tell you. Those interceptor missiles cost more than $300 million combined, while the Iranian drones they were shooting down cost approximately $30,000 each. Iran forced the United States to burn through nearly $500 million in defensive munitions in less than half an hour, and they still had 300 incoming threats that nothing could stop. What happened next represents the single greatest intelligence failure and strategic miscalculation in modern American military history. As the defensive missile magazines depleted, the strike group's last line of defense, the phalanx close-in weapon systems and rolling airframe missiles, engaged targets at point-blank range. Sailors watched in horror as Iranian Shahed 136 loitering munitions flying at barely 100 feet above the water weaved through the final defensive layer like ghosts. The phalanx systems, designed to fire 4,500 rounds per minute of 20-millimeter ammunition, managed to down approximately 40% of the remaining drones. But here's the devastating truth. They were never designed to handle this volume of simultaneous threats from multiple approach vectors. The system that was supposed to be the impenetrable last shield became nothing more than expensive fireworks lighting up the night sky while Iranian munitions slammed home. Before we continue, you need to understand something critical that Washington desperately wants to hide. If you want to see the real story of what's happening in the Middle East, the truth that exposes the mythology of American military invincibility, you absolutely must hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications because what I'm about to reveal about Iran's actual military capabilities versus the propaganda you've been fed will completely transform your understanding of this conflict. The mainstream media won't tell you this story. The Pentagon is actively suppressing the full damage assessment. But this community right here, right now, we're going to expose exactly what happened and what it means for the future of American power projection. So smash that like button, subscribe, and let's continue, because this is where it gets truly devastating. The Theodore Roosevelt itself took multiple direct hits. Iranian Zulfiqar anti-ship ballistic missiles, precision-guided weapons traveling at Mach 5 and designed specifically to penetrate carrier defenses, struck the flight deck in at least 3 confirmed locations, igniting massive fires that spread to the hangar bay below. The carrier's island superstructure suffered catastrophic damage from what appears to be a swarm of Shahed 238 kamikaze drones that specifically targeted the ship's radar arrays and communications equipment, effectively blinding the vessel and severing its command and control capabilities. Early reports suggest casualties in the hundreds, with the number likely to climb significantly as damage assessment continues. But here's what should terrify every American. The carrier is not sinking because of its compartmentalized design and damage control, but it is completely non-operational, dead in the water, unable to launch or recover aircraft, and now represents the world's most expensive sitting target, requiring a massive salvage and rescue operation in waters that Iran effectively controls. The escort vessels fared even worse. The USS Lake Champlain, after exhausting all its missiles, took direct hits from 3 separate C-802 anti-ship cruise missiles fired from Iranian fast attack craft that closed to within 20 kilometers under the cover of the drone swarm chaos. The ship is listing heavily to starboard, flooding in multiple compartments, and may have already been abandoned. The USS Mustin reported massive damage to its superstructure and is burning uncontrollably. The USS Ralph Johnson went dark approximately 40 minutes into the engagement, its last communication reporting critical hits below the waterline and uncontrolled flooding. Naval analysts are using very careful language, but the implication is clear. At least 1, possibly 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, each valued at nearly $2 billion, have been sunk or are sinking right now in the Persian Gulf. Now, let me give you the context that makes this catastrophe make sense, because what just happened didn't occur in a vacuum. This is the culmination of decades of Iranian military doctrine development specifically designed to neutralize American carrier strike groups in the confined waters of the Persian Gulf. While the United States spent trillions of dollars on increasingly complex and expensive naval platforms designed for blue water operations against near-peer competitors, Iran developed an asymmetric anti-access area denial strategy that turns the Persian Gulf's geography into a death trap for exactly these kinds of expensive capital ships. The Strait of Hormuz, barely 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point, surrounded by Iranian territory on multiple sides, crisscrossed by commercial shipping, and filled with islands that can hide launch platforms. This is not the open ocean where American naval power dominates. This is Iran's backyard, and they've spent 40 years turning it into the world's most sophisticated anti-ship killing zone. Let's talk about the weapon systems that just devastated a carrier strike group, because understanding these capabilities exposes the fundamental delusion at the heart of American military planning. The Shahed 136, the primary drone used in this attack, is a loitering munition with a range of approximately 2,000 kilometers, carries a warhead of around 50 kilograms, and costs approximately $30,000 to $50,000 to produce. Iran manufactures these by the thousands. Compare that to the Standard Missile 2 interceptor that costs $4 million per shot, and you begin to understand the economic impossibility of defending against this kind of attack. Iran can build 130 Shahed 136 drones for the cost of a single interceptor missile. They can launch 1,000 drones for the cost of defending against them, and that's before we even discuss the cruise missiles and ballistic missiles in the attack package. The Zulfiqar anti-ship ballistic missile represents an entirely different category of threat that American naval defenses are fundamentally not designed to counter. This is a precision-guided ballistic missile with a range of 700 kilometers, equipped with a maneuvering re-entry vehicle that can adjust adjust its trajectory during the terminal phase, making interception exponentially more difficult. The missile travels at approximately Mach 5 during its descent, giving defensive systems mere seconds to detect, track, engage, and destroy the threat. The Aegis system was designed primarily to engage aircraft and subsonic cruise missiles, not hypersonic ballistic threats making terminal maneuvers. When you combine these ballistic missiles with simultaneous saturation attacks from hundreds of drones and subsonic cruise missiles, you create a targeting and engagement problem that simply cannot be solved with current American defensive technology. But the real genius of Iran's approach isn't just the individual weapon systems, it's the integrated operational concept that coordinates these different threat types to systematically collapse defensive capabilities. The initial wave of cheap drones forces defensive systems to begin firing, depleting missile magazines and revealing the locations of radar and launch systems. The second wave includes faster cruise missiles that exploit the chaos and depleted defenses. The third wave delivers the ballistic missiles that penetrate to the high-value targets after the defensive umbrella has been shredded. And throughout this entire sequence, Iranian fast attack craft armed with anti-ship missiles close the distance under the cover of the aerial chaos, ready to deliver finishing blows at point-blank range. This is not improvisation. This is a doctrine that has been refined, tested, and now executed with devastating effectiveness against the most powerful navy in the world. The cost comparison is absolutely staggering and reveals the unsustainable economics of American naval power in this environment. The total cost of the Iranian weapons used in this attack, 400 drones at $40,000 each, 300 cruise missiles at approximately $500,000 each, and 70 ballistic missiles at around $2 million each, comes to approximately $310 million. The American defensive response consumed nearly $500 million in interceptor missiles and still failed to prevent catastrophic damage. The potential loss of the carrier, cruiser, and 2 destroyers represents approximately $20 billion in capital assets. The follow-on costs for salvage, rescue, repair, medical care, and operational disruption will easily exceed another billion. Iran just delivered a 50-to-1 return on investment in a single night's operation, and they still have thousands more drones and hundreds more missiles in reserve. Now here's where the story takes an even more devastating turn. The Roosevelt Strike Group wasn't operating alone or unprepared. This wasn't a peacetime patrol caught by surprise. The strike group was operating at heightened alert status, had been reinforced with additional escort vessels specifically because of rising tensions, had full intelligence support, including satellite surveillance and signals intelligence, and was actively implementing defensive postures against potential Iranian attack. In other words, this wasn't a lucky sucker punch. This was Iran defeating the United States Navy when it was ready, prepared, and actively defending itself with every advantage that American military technology could provide. That reality should terrify Pentagon planners, because if a carrier strike group at full readiness with complete situational awareness can be effectively neutralized in under an hour, what exactly is the American strategy for operating in the Persian Gulf going to be? The geopolitical implications are staggering and will reshape the entire Middle Eastern security architecture. Every American ally in the region just watched the supposedly invincible U.S. Navy get mauled by a nation operating under the most comprehensive sanctions regime in modern history. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, these nations have based their entire security strategy on the assumption that American military power would protect them from Iranian retaliation. That assumption just evaporated in a single night. Why would any rational Gulf state continue antagonizing Iran when the American security guarantee has been exposed as hollow? The recalculation happening right now in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi will fundamentally alter the regional balance of power in ways that favor Iranian influence and marginalize American leverage. For Trump, this represents a political catastrophe of almost unimaginable proportions. This is a president who has built his entire Middle East policy on maximum pressure against Iran, who withdrew from the nuclear agreement, who reimposed crushing crushing sanctions, who assassinated Qasem Soleimani, and who has repeatedly threatened military action while insisting that American military dominance would force Iranian capitulation. Instead, Iran just handed him the most humiliating military defeat in modern American history. The images of a burning American carrier, the casualty numbers that will dominate headlines for weeks, the questions about why this was allowed to happen, all of this lands directly in the Oval Office during what was supposed to be Trump's triumphant return to power. The political ramifications will be catastrophic, and they're just beginning. But the real revelation here is what this exposes about the fundamental transformation in modern warfare that the American military establishment has been desperately trying to ignore. The era of expensive, centralized, platform-centric warfare is ending, defeated by cheap, distributed, expendable systems that can be produced in massive quantities and employed in overwhelming swarms. A $13 billion aircraft carrier, no matter how technologically advanced, cannot survive in an environment where an adversary can produce thousands of $30,000 drones that can be launched from trucks, boats, and underground facilities scattered across hundreds of kilometers of territory. The economics don't work. The defensive mathematics don't work. The strategic logic that justified these platforms has been shattered. Iran didn't need to build a navy that could match the United States ship for ship. They didn't need nuclear-powered carriers or advanced destroyers or sophisticated submarines. They built exactly what they needed to defend their strategic interests in their home waters. Massive inventories of relatively simple, cost-effective weapons that could be employed in sufficient numbers to overwhelm any defensive system. While America spent decades and trillions of dollars building a smaller number of exquisite platforms, Iran built tens of thousands of good enough weapons. And in the confined waters of the Persian Gulf, good enough weapons in overwhelming numbers just defeated exquisite platforms comprehensively. The mainstream narrative will scramble to explain this away. You'll hear about tactical mistakes, intelligence failures, bad luck, or extenuating circumstances. The Pentagon will promise investigations and after-action reports. Defense contractors will propose expensive upgrades and new systems to counter the demonstrated threat. But here's the truth they cannot escape. This wasn't a failure of execution. It was a failure of strategy. The entire American approach to naval power projection in the Persian Gulf was based on assumptions that have now been proven catastrophically wrong. No amount of tactical adjustment or technological upgrade will change the fundamental reality that operating expensive capital ships in confined waters against an adversary with massive inventories of precision-guided weapons is not sustainable. The regional implications extend far beyond immediate military calculations. Iran has just demonstrated to every nation in the world that American military power, for all its expense and sophistication, can be effectively neutralized by a determined adversary employing asymmetric strategies and willing to accept the risks of confrontation. This lesson will be studied carefully in Beijing, in Moscow, in Pyongyang, and in every capital that has felt threatened by American military pressure. The myth of invincibility that has been central to American deterrent strategy has been shattered. The psychological impact of this defeat will far exceed even the substantial material losses. For the global energy markets, the implications are equally profound. The Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 21% of global oil consumption passes daily, is now effectively controlled by Iran. Not legally, not formally, but practically. Iran has just demonstrated the capability to close this waterway at will, and there is nothing the United States Navy can do to prevent it without accepting catastrophic losses. Every drop of oil that transits the strait does so now with Iranian permission, whether explicit or implicit. That fundamentally alters the global energy security equation and gives Iran leverage over the world economy that no sanctions regime can neutralize. The Chinese are watching this very carefully, drawing lessons for their own anti-access area denial strategy in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. If Iran can effectively neutralize American carrier strike groups using relatively simple weapons in large quantities, what could China accomplish with its far more sophisticated military-industrial complex and far larger economy? The demonstration effect of this attack will accelerate Chinese military planning and embolden their strategic calculations about American ability to intervene in regional conflicts. American credibility in the Western Pacific just took a massive hit based on events in the Persian Gulf. But let's talk about what happens next, because the immediate crisis is far from over. The USS Theodore Roosevelt is dead in the water in hostile territory, unable to defend itself, requiring immediate assistance that must somehow be delivered through the same threat environment that just devastated the strike group. The salvage and rescue operation will require additional naval assets, air support, and likely negotiated agreements with regional partners, all while under the shadow of potential follow-on Iranian attacks. This is a hostage situation involving thousands of American personnel and tens of billions of dollars in military hardware, and Iran holds every advantage in dictating the terms of resolution. Trump now faces impossible choices. Does he escalate with retaliatory strikes against Iranian territory, risking even broader conflict and further losses? Does he negotiate for safe passage to extract the damaged vessels, accepting the humiliation of asking Iran for permission to rescue American forces? Does he attempt a military solution to establish a security corridor, potentially triggering the very wider war that this disaster was supposed to prevent? Every option is bad. Every choice carries catastrophic risk, and the clock is ticking as the damaged carrier becomes increasingly vulnerable, and casualties mount from fires and flooding that damage control teams are struggling to contain. The silence from the Pentagon is deafening and telling. Nearly 6 hours after the initial attack, there has been no official statement beyond vague acknowledgement of an incident involving U.S. naval forces in the Persian Gulf. No casualty figures, no damage assessment, no explanation of how this was allowed to happen. That silence speaks volumes about the scale of the catastrophe and the panic currently consuming the upper echelons of the Defense Department. When the full accounting finally emerges, the political and institutional consequences will be seismic. This attack also exposes the fundamental vulnerability of America's global military posture. The United States maintains approximately 800 military installations in more than 70 countries, operates 11 carrier strike groups worldwide, and maintains forward deployed forces on every continent. This global presence is predicated on the assumption that American technological superiority and firepower overmatch allow small numbers of expensive platforms to dominate any theater. But if those platforms can be overwhelmed by cheap weapons in large quantities, the entire strategic logic collapses. The cost of defending all those bases, maintaining all those deployments, operating all those expensive systems becomes unsustainable when adversaries can threaten them with weapons that cost a fraction of the defensive response. Iran has just provided the blueprint for how medium-sized powers can effectively deter or defeat American military intervention without requiring near-peer military capabilities. Build large inventories of relatively simple, precision-guided weapons, develop doctrine for coordinated saturation attacks, exploit geographic advantages, and accept that some forces will be lost in exchange for inflicting disproportionate damage on exponentially more expensive American systems. This is fourth-generation warfare applied to conventional military operations, and the United States has no effective answer. The human cost of this disaster will dominate headlines once the casualty figures are released, and those numbers are likely to be horrifying. A carrier strike group comprises approximately 7,500 personnel across all vessels. Early estimates suggest casualties in the hundreds, with that number likely to climb substantially. These are American sailors, airmen, and Marines who believed they were protected by the most advanced defensive systems in the world, serving on the most powerful warships ever built. That protection failed catastrophically, and families across America are about to receive devastating news that will force a national reckoning about the costs and risks of the military posture failure that led to this disaster. The propaganda implications cannot be overstated. Iran will leverage this victory mercilessly, broadcasting images of burning American warships, highlighting the cost-effectiveness of their weapons versus American defenses, demonstrating to the entire region that resistance to American pressure is not only possible but potentially successful. Every resistance movement, every adversarial state, every nation that has chafed under American military pressure will take heart from this demonstration. The narrative of inevitable American military dominance that has been central to Washington's diplomatic leverage has been shattered, and rebuilding that credibility will take years if it's even possible.